A show based on the facts, honesty, the man, the myth, the legend, ChristiTutionalist Joseph M. Leonard.
Welcome to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast, aka CTP, in association with TheLibertyBeacon.com, and I am your host, Joseph M. Leonard, and that's Leonard. CTP is your no muss, no fuss, just me, you, and occasional guest type podcast. Really appreciate you tuning in. As Graham Norton would say, let's get on with the show! Welcome back, everybody. The face on the screen, if you're looking at the BitChute, Brighteon, Rumble, or YouTube behind the scenes, should be familiar. It's Peter's Serefine, but pronounced Serafine. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Glad to have a follow-up with what's going on. I hadn't had the chance to see if Google's still trying to block access to your website or not yet. Has that been cleared up as far as you know?
I don't know. That was the website for my book. My most recent book, Trust Shattered, TrustShattered.com was the website in question. And I don't know if it ever worked or not. But I didn't get a whole lot of sales, I'll tell you that.
Well, today, your back is kind of a follow-up. Already now talked about Trust Shattered. People can, of course, go back into the CTP show archives, find the episode on that. Oh, there it is. For those looking behind the scenes, there's the cover. For the benefit of the transcript, Peter held up the book. But this is more or less, what the heck are you up to now? But for those who hadn't seen the first one, so they don't have to pause this and run back to the other one, tell us who you are, where you are, that kind of thing again.
My name's Peter Serefine. I am in the middle of the great state of Independence, Pennsylvania. I'm an author. I'm a Patriot Academy Constitution coach. I'm an instructor for Institute on the Constitution. I'm a constitutional originalist who has created the brand Liberty-Lighthouse. And Liberty-Lighthouse is guiding our way back to constitutional principles. So everything I do is aimed at trying to get us, we the people, back to learning and understanding the Constitution as our founders intended it.
And a big part of what this show is about, too, which is why I'm happy to have you on again. So now we got that nitty-gritty stuff out of the way again. What indeed is your current project?
My most recent project is probably the thing I am most proud of. It was the idea I had for my fifth book. But once I started outlining it, I realized it was going to be a mammoth encyclopedia of a book that nobody would ever read. And I call it the Founders Constitution. And the idea is to go through the Constitution and highlight all the key phrases and the clauses and all the things that people get caught up on and explain what they meant by our founding fathers. But I don't want anybody to ever take my word for anything. So, I was going to include in this book the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and the ratification debates. And, this was going to be, probably 2,000 pages long by the time it was done. Something that nobody would ever read.
Something that would be likely too expensive for most to buy.
Right. So I turned it into a free resource, and Founders Constitution is now a page of Liberty-Lighthouse.com, my homepage, Liberty-Lighthouse.com. I have it pulled up. If you will allow me to share my screen,
you'll have to describe it all.
Of course I will.
Go ahead and try and share.
All right, just a second here. Let me right page. So the Founders Constitution, you go to Liberty-Lighthouse.com, and then you click on the page Constitution, and it pulls up the Founders Constitution. In the Founders Constitution, it is the full text of the original Constitution before any amendments were made. And I think that's important because by reading into the amendments, we've kind of overlooked some of the original, and some of our amendments, quite frankly, just go completely against original.
Like the 17th Amendment that I keep crying about needs to be repealed. Yes.
Absolutely. The 16th and 17th both go against the original intent of our founding fathers. For those that aren't aware, the 16th is federal income tax, and the 17th is the election of senators. So my founder's constitution, it's the original constitution before any amendments, and it's written out and it's broken down into the 7 articles, and you can click on any one particular article if you like and jump to that part. But I'm going to use, for the example here, we're just going to read the preamble. Everybody knows the preamble, right? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, there's 8 or 9 different things just in that preamble that are underlined. Those are hyperlinks. So let's take the general welfare clause.
Another thing that I rail about has been indeed bastardized. Promoting the general welfare means something that benefits virtually everybody. It doesn't mean individual welfare checks. That is a complete distortion of promote the general welfare clause.
Right. What you're describing is individual welfare, not general welfare. So let's click on that, promote the general welfare in the preamble. Well, it opens up a little pop-up window. In that pop-up window, it says, promote the general welfare, explanation. Now, this explanation is, but take my word, it says this phrase means that the government should work to support the well-being of all of its citizens. It does not grant unlimited power. It is intended to provide for the common good through specific enumerated powers. Now, where did I get my definition? That's the important part of this. There are 3 sources listed. Federalist Paper number 41, Madison's letter to Edmund Pendleton in 1792, and Madison's speech to the House of Representatives also in 1792. And those are all hyperlinked. If you click those, like, for example, Federalist 41, it says James Madison explains that the General Welfare Clause is not a grant of unlimited power, but must be understood in the context of the enumerated powers that follow. Well, again, don't take my word for it. So you click on Federalist 41, and it then opens up the full text of Federalist Paper number 41, not from my website where I could have manipulated it, from the Library of Congress website.
Yes, that's an important distinction.
So that is the Founders Constitution. And of course, the whole Constitution is there. We all know the original Constitution is only like 4,500 words. Well, this is about 2,000 lines of HTML and JavaScript. It's about 2,000 lines of code. I am not a computer programmer. So this was a massive project for me. But I think it's a fantastic tool that anybody can use to understand what our founders meant about anything.
So few understand what's in there. They only hear a line or two. They know the First Amendment, right?
Yeah.
They don't pay any attention to it, but they know it. And they know the Second Amendment. Also, at the same time, they try to undermine it. But a lot of the other sections, indeed, a lot of people do not know is even there.
Well, I would argue that the people, you said people know the First Amendment. I would argue they don't even know the First Amendment correctly. The Establishment Clause, for example, Congress shall not establish a state religion. Well, at the time that they did that, at the time the First Amendment passed, 3 of the 13 original states had state-sanctioned religions, and that was not considered a violation of the First Amendment. First Amendment only applied to Congress. The federal government could not mandate a specific state religion.
Correct. I'm glad you brought that up, because being a Christian show, I get into arguments all the time and this is why they don't want history taught in schools, to know these things. That indeed, I think Massachusetts was one of those 3 that had an official state church. And you bring that up to people and their eyes glaze over, because they don't know, as I say about the left, they don't know, they don't want to know, because they know enough that if they knew, their feelings-based delusional bubble would be burst.
That's another thing I've worked on. I'm not a terribly religious person. But the more I have studied the Constitution and our founding fathers over the last 10 years, the more faithful I've become. These men wove faith into everything that they did. The separation of church and state is a myth, a lie, a bastardization of a individual line extracted from a letter and from Jefferson, taken completely out of context. I've designed a 1-hour lecture presentation, whatever you want to call it, that explains that no, our churches need to be involved in politics. So I made this course, this lecture, this presentation, whatever you want to call this thing. It's roughly an hour long, and I've made it with religious leaders in mind. Want them to understand, the Johnson Amendment has been completely twisted out of well beyond what it was originally meant to be. The Johnson Amendment to the IRS code says that nonprofit organizations, including churches, can't be partisan. Doesn't say they can't talk about politics. It says they can't be partisan. They can't endorse an individual party or an individual candidate, but they can talk about the issues. They can teach from the Bible.
As they should, the biblical aspects of our founding. I got 2 quotes in my CTP 2 book. John Adams, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And then his other, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. And you may lay out facts and evidence all day long that people just don't want to hear because it's inconvenient to their preferred narrative.
They've twisted everything. The whole, the separation of church and state. That phrase came about from a line in a letter between Jefferson. I think it was Jefferson.
It was.
For just a split second there, I thought maybe it was Madison, but it was Jefferson. A letter between Jefferson and the Danbury Baptists. And he says, a great wall of separation. But if you read the whole thing, if you read that line in context, Jefferson is basically reassuring that the Baptists have nothing to worry about as far as the government getting involved in there.
That the federal government cannot intrude on the church, and the federal government could not pick Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Catholic, cannot supplant a national church over your state church. Yeah, that's on the back of my original ChristiTutionalist politics book about that. Yes, the bastardization of Jefferson's letter. As I say, they don't want separation of church and state, as Jefferson was talking. They want separation from church to state.
Right. And I mean, clearly our founding fathers wanted faithful people involved in government. They put the 10 Commandments on the doors of the Supreme Court. They opened every day, every session of Congress, even today, since the beginning, every session of Congress opens with a prayer. Every session of the Supreme Court opens with prayer. They did not design a government to be secular and devoid of faith. They designed a government that was restricted enough that it would not interfere with faith.
Exactly. And I often mention Penn of Penn and Teller. You don't have to be religious to understand it's just being a good citizen to treat each other well. And Penn has no problem with the 10 Commandments on the SCOTUS because he agrees as an atheist. It's just being a good neighbor. And no, Tim Walls, socialism, stealing from a neighbor to give to another, is not biblical community. That is false doctrine communism. But yeah, Penn says, I got no right to take someone else's life or their mine. Same with stealing. I have no right to your stuff. You have no right to my stuff. You don't have to base that in the Bible, but that is indeed what it was. Like self-defense. Exodus 22:2. If a thief in the night is dealt the fatal blow, you're not guilty of murder. And that's why we've really screwed up the 10 Commandments. It is thou shalt not murder innocents, not thou shalt not kill, because the Bible lays out several places where killing is okay and you're not guilty of murder.
Thou shalt do no murder is not the same as thou shalt not kill.
Correct. Absolutely. And there are so many supposed fellow Christians that don't grasp that, because when they were translated from the early Aramaic, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, they were messed up. And then every subsequent quarter of a century, more Bible versions came out that then further twisted it by wrong definitions or misapplication of the original text.
Because very few of them went back to the original text. Most of them relied on somebody else's translation.
Right. So you got a bad translation on a bad translation on a bad translation. Right.
If you want to have real fun, the first widely available English translation of the Bible is known as the Geneva Bible. That's the Bible that our founding fathers would have had. That's the Bible that, oh, by the way, stoked the flames of liberty in the pulpits for the American Revolution. This is a Bible that talked about liberty and freedom, standing against tyranny.
Yeah,
the Bible.
Yeah, the black robe regiments, right, as I've spoken on many times. And indeed, I'm going to repeat it. Community versus communism. Community is by choice, free will. It's voluntary, and it's about charity from our own blood and treasure to help our brothers and sisters, not communism. Jesus was not a socialist. He did not say steal from one neighbor to give to another. That is satanic, worldly communism. It is communism, community, voluntary, communism, force, community, charity, communism, theft and redistribution.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, compare the planks of the Communist Manifesto to our current government, and we're one tiny little step away. We're almost there now. There's so much of it that has already been instituted in the supposedly free republic of the United States. For the last 150 years-ish, we've started to ignore the intentions of our fathers, the goal of liberty, the purpose of government. The purpose of government was laid out in plain language by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. To secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. To secure our rights is the purpose of government, not to provide stuff, not to provision the poor, as Madison would say.
This is not directly related to government, but, Matthew 7 is really condemn not lest ye be condemned. Final judgment is for the Lord. There are 12 plus other scriptures that tell you to judge biblically. Remove the log from your own eye. The same set of biblical standards, no hypocrisy. But where I was going to go, as in thou shalt not murder innocents, the sin of pride, it's really the sin of hubris. There is a difference. I can be proud of my children doing well in school all day long. That's not a sin. I can be prideful of a work well done at my job. Hubris, when everything is only and ever about you and what do you get out of anything and everything, hubris is the sin.
Again, mistranslations and twisting to fit a narrative. It's what society does today. But the funny thing about it is, it's what government has always done, and our founding fathers knew that.
As Glenn Beck would say, the Overton window. We were the first society really to move the window back towards freedom. And the Bible talks about free will. We are supposed to be free people. The Overton window, the natural flow, is back towards a ruling elite class lording over all others.
Right. And that happened largely because we flipped the flow of money in our country with the 16th Amendment, and gave the federal government the power to reach down and take money straight from citizens. rather than going through the check and balance of the state like they were originally supposed to do. And what happens, we all know, with money comes power. So once you reverse the flow of money, you also reverse the flow of power in our country. There's a lot of simple things that people don't understand that it all goes back to John Jay. I opened the book with a quote from John Jay, and it's one of this is a quote that kind of guides everything that I do. Every member of a state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they are violated and be better prepared to defend and assert them.
And I know every election, somebody says, this is the most important election ever.
Mhm.
I think this one might actually be that. We are on the precipice of being lost forever. I coined the hashtag ROAR, ROAR, right? ROAR. I'm not talking Katy Perry music video. I'm talking restore our American Republic. This is our last chance, or it's gone.
Well, I wrote an article in my Substack not too long ago. I referred to this election as one of the most divisive and quite possibly one of the most telling elections of my lifetime, in that we have the most liberal progressive representative in one party, and we have quite possibly one of the most, I don't even know how to say this, right wing people of the other party in decades, and there's very little commonality between them. These are two very polarizing presidential candidates, and it's going to be very telling to us as a country, because if it turns out that the popular vote is still really close, that means that we really are a divided republic. And if it ends out being a landslide one way or another, then that shows that the populace has, expressed their will, and we'll see where we are.
Yeah, I fear I've had on William R. Douglas in his book, Civil War 2.0, because if indeed things could turn hot and we could have another all-out civil war, and it would be very different than the last one, because you're not going to have these set of states against those set of states. It's going to be within every state, people fighting at each other in states and against other states at the same. It would be the most bloody mess you have ever seen.
Yeah, it would be terrible, will be terrible. But there's a lot of things that we can do that people just don't pay attention to. People don't, because they didn't read and study the Constitution. They don't understand the way things were supposed to work. We, the people, had the power to stop government from ever getting this bad. We chose not to use it. We had the power to stand up when the 17th Amendment passed and said, no, that those senators are a check. Those senators being appointed by my state are a check of the rights and power of my state.
Yes.
And we could have stood up and revolted against the well, it would never be greater than 2% income tax that started in 1913. That, if you do the math and you figure out like how much money you had to make and all that, if you made less than $7,500,000 a year in today's money, then you didn't have to pay an income tax at all. And if you made that much, then you paid 1%. And if you were, Henry Ford or Dale Carnegie, okay, maybe you paid a little more. Like it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%. I think 7 was the highest it went. 7%.
Mm-hmm. And then, though, at the time of JFK, the top bracket was 75 or 90%. I don't, whatever was either number, way too high.
Absolutely. I've always thought, God demands a tithe, which was a tenth. If 10% is good enough for God, 10% should be good enough for man. So maybe we make a 10% tax that gets divided, and the feds get 5 cents and the state gets 3 cents and your local government gets 2 cents. And look, there's 10 cents.
We certainly need an overhaul. I am always on. I oppose the value-added tax, and those who support the fair tax say, "Well, it won't be that." What planet do you live on? Have you not? What you think it is and what it will be are two different things.
The fair tax, I kind of like it. And I like it for a couple of reasons, but I understand your argument.
Only via constitutional amendment. If we repeal and replace the 16th,
right,
I would agree.
That's
but otherwise, yeah,
that's in the bill.
Yeah,
the fair tax bill says that the fair tax passes, and they have 1 year or 2 years or something like that to repeal the 17th. And if it doesn't happen, then fair tax goes away. It expires.
One Congress cannot impose on another. If you really believe that'll happen, I got a bridge to sell you. Because immediately 2 years later, that repeal part will just be ignored or taken out of the bill.
Yeah, they'll just extend it. Yeah.
No, you must repeal and replace the 16th by constitutional amendment at the same time.
Honestly, they don't have to.
No, thank you.
They don't have to replace the 16th Amendment. They just need to repeal it. All the provisions for earning money by the federal government are already in the Constitution. Repeal the 16th Amendment, and they have to go back to doing it the old way, which was they do it through import tariffs and excise taxes. And if they needed anything else, they had to go to the states and bill the states apportioned by population. So every person was responsible for the same amount of tax, and your state got to decide how to pay that tax. And which is why, some states have an income tax and some states don't. And some states have sales tax and some states don't. Some states have, giant taxes on hotels.
Yeah. Well, I don't ever see a repeal of the 16th except for maybe a convention of states. So I oppose the fair tax for that reason. I am in Detroit, right across the river from Canada, where they've got property tax, governmental sales tax, providential sales tax, this tax, that tax. If no one understands that will be the end result of the fair tax, they're living on Pluto.
Right. And I wouldn't doubt that. The fair tax folks have done what they can to make one go away when the other one replace the other. But I agree, a constitutional amendment is the best way to go about it. And I was just a few weeks ago recruited to be a state content writer for the Convention of States project, Convention of States Action Group here in Pennsylvania. We're not supposed to say Convention of States Project anymore. That's what I remember it as, because that was the first time I heard about it, 10 years ago. That's what it was then. But now it's Convention of States Action. And I now write articles for them too.
Yeah. So again, to be clear, I could support a fair tax, but only if the 16th is gone.
Right.
Then you go first, right? I'm tired of we'll promise to do this if you let us do that. Right. No, you go first. This time.
The last time that worked was probably the Bill of Rights, when Madison told the Virginia and a couple of the other states, okay, look, if you ratify the Constitution, I promise the first thing we'll do is a Bill of Rights. And by golly, he did it.
but the people in power now are not them.
And the interesting part about that is Madison was one of those individuals who didn't think that we needed a Bill of Rights. He thought that the Constitution itself, because of it was enumerated powers, that anything that wasn't enumerated wasn't a power. Why did you need a Bill of Rights?
Exactly.
And he still did the Bill of Rights because he promised to do the Bill of Rights.
Because he was actually a man of his word, unlike the people of today. But technically speaking, we didn't need the Bill of Rights. They were already identified as God-given rights. But to further put it in writing, the government shall not do these things. And again, even if we send a repeal of the 16 to the states, that'll take decades to be ratified. And even if it is ratified, whatever is put in place to replace it, again, they can never be held to their word. That's why I want a repeal and replace at one time. So if they ignore the Constitution, or we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So they could attempt to ignore that also, but at least we would have something a little more firm. It would take another constitutional amendment to repeal, replace, or change it, as opposed to every 2 years the Congress throw everything out. What we promised last year doesn't mean a thing.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like about the Convention of States Action Group is they don't push or promote any individual amendment proposals. They're just pushing to have the Article 5 Convention of States to have the discussion about, hey, what are some amendments that would work to do this? Now, one of the reasons, I've gone back and forth about whether or not I thought an Article 5 convention was a good idea for a long time. For the last 10 years, it's a great idea. I'm not sure. It's a great idea. I'm not sure. And when I was talking to him recently, the state content coordinator here in Pennsylvania, he says to me, he goes, well, why aren't you sure? I said, because the government ignores the Constitution now. What's another amendment going to do?
Yeah.
And he had a really good answer.
Did he?
The answer is the government doesn't usually start to ignore amendments until they're about 100 years old. So even if they do ignore it, we'll be long dead by the time they start to ignore it.
Yeah. And the point being, it is much more elaborate a process, and people would likely know. So in our or their lifetime, it would have occurred, and likely then indeed that time passing before they ignore it. And I'm staying with Mark Levin on Convention of States. I am all for it. I do not buy the people who I think are all CINOs, rhinos, or fascocrats that like the ruling establishment deep state status they have. So they throw out, it'll be a runaway convention. No. It's a
big lie anyway. The first convention wasn't a runaway convention. Once the delegates sat down and realized that there was no saving the Articles of Confederation, everybody went back to their states and got permission to write a new constitution. It was not a runaway. They all were authorized to do what they did. And when they wrote the new constitution, it had to be ratified by the states because nobody was bound by it until they agreed to it.
Exactly right.
No runaway to it.
If there would come a repeal of the Second Amendment in a convention of states, there would not be enough states to ratify it for it to ever exist. Yes.
38 states would have to ratify that. And
would not happen.
No, never, not to. You know what's interesting about the Article 5 Convention of States portion of the Constitution? Madison was well known for being an extremely diligent note taker, and he wrote down every word that everybody said at every one of these meetings. And when George Mason stood up at the Constitutional Convention and said, "Wait a minute, we've only given government the power to restrain themselves. We've given the people no power to restrain the government, and we know government will never restrain itself." And he proposed that they be able to call conventions and have the states proposed amendments. And in Madison's notes, it was the Latin phrase, I can't remember because I don't know Latin, but in Madison notes, it said basically no discussion in Latin. It was the one and only part of the 7 articles of the Constitution that there was zero debate about. Everybody agreed. It was like Mason stood up and said this, and everybody in the room went, "Oh, duh."
All right. Well, the time has flown by. Wrapping things up, is there anything else off of all that other stuff you want to mention or impart before we leave?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Podcast fans, get more about your favorite podcasts via deepcast.fm, transcripts, and all kinds of extra available information on your favorite podcast, including ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast, is listed at deepcast.fm, as well as, are you a podcaster? Well, you can claim your free listing and more via Deepcast Pro. Check out tinyurl.com/DeepcastPro for podcasters for your free listing, and that's the number 4 in there. tinyurl.com/DeepcastPro for podcasters, the number 4, Deepcast Pro, the number 4 podcasters via tinyurl.com extension. Take care, all. You gotta check them out. Get more out of your podcast, whether you're the podcaster or the podcastee. Yeah, I think I just invented that word.
Go to my website, liberty-lighthouse.com. And from there, you can find my weekly articles from Substack. You can find all 4 of my books. You can find the Founders Constitution, which I am immensely proud of. And please share that with everybody. And share that with your crazy lefty relatives and your crazy right-wing relatives. Share it with everybody, because we, the people, need to understand our founding documents if we're ever going to get a hold of our control of our government again.
Yep, agreed. All right. Well, thank you for coming back, Peter. Really appreciate it. I knew this would be another great discussion.
Thanks for having me back.
Hello, everybody. I just saw another commercial, an ad for the, quote, God Bless the USA, unquote, branded Bible. Okay, let's address it. Good, bad, indifferent. Well, the good, of course, obvious, if someone who does not have a Bible is indeed enticed to buy a copy of this Bible, that's a good thing. The potential bad thing is I don't have a copy of it, and frankly, don't intend to buy a copy of it, but they should voluntarily send ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast a copy so that they can avoid any future potential criticism from me. And the criticism is, again, not having looked at it, don't know, but the potential, the concern here is what is or is not, what is added to make it a, quote, God Bless the USA, unquote, Bible, what might be removed to make it a God Bless the USA Bible versus, oh, then why shouldn't peon Trudeau in Canada struggling to hold power put out his propaganda version of God Bless Canada Bible, or God Bless the UK Bible, or Putin, the guy who's been involved in the politics and power and control over Russia since the late 1990s, who former KGB, I call a fake Christian. And I say that why? He's evil, not stupid. He's former KGB. He knows John Paul II, Reagan, Thatcher, that religion helped bring down the Soviet Union. He's not going to make that mistake while he's trying to reconstitute through invasion and other undermining of other nations to try to have his puppets in control to reconstitute the Soviet Empire. He's not going to make that mistake. So he allows the sense of more religious freedom in Russia. And of course, why wouldn't he? Why shouldn't he? It will surprise me if he doesn't come out with the God bless Russia, quote unquote, branded propaganda Bible. That's the issue. That's the point. Until we look at it and know what's been added, what's potentially been removed to make it that particular branded version of the Bible. Is it really a propaganda piece, or is it indeed really truly the Word of God and about Jesus Christ? So I just wanted to take a brief moment to interject that. I don't know. I don't plan on buying a copy of it. They should send it to me, because until such time, I indeed will continue to question, and it will remain an open question. Did they add stuff? It's the God Bless the USA Bible. Obviously, they've added that to the cover of the Bible. What else have they potentially added? What have they potentially maybe left out? Those questions and concerns will remain regarding the God Bless America Bible version, or a true Don't Bless Canada version, a labor leftist wokist propaganda version for the UK or France or Germany or Italy, as cultural Marxists try pushing them further and further into the commie-fasci socialist leftism of things. More power, more control for them. And in order to do that, they must fool the people. So, of course, why wouldn't they release a propaganda version of the Bible that's been changed, adding things and omitting things? I'm not saying Lee Greenwood did that with this version of the Bible. I am just saying it is an obvious question to ask and must be answered regarding this and or any other branded version of a Bible. And especially if other nations start following suit in this notion. What about the communist? While someone yells out, Jesus is Lord at a rally, says, you're at the wrong rally. Yeah. The atheist party pretending to still be Christian the next day at a black church. Oh, I'm a great Christian. Vote for me. Why wouldn't the communist also come out with a propaganda version of her Bible? I know you can see here. It's like I've said on the show, like on Trudy Bierman, PSI TV. You can find that on your Roku stick or channel, smart app on your smart TV. Self-reflection. Do not get upset by me asking the questions that should be asked, and us all needing to look in our mirror at ourselves and self-reflect. What are the answers to these questions? Don't be upset by the questions. The only reason to be upset by the question is if there's something to hide, and the answer would be inconvenient. So let's ask the questions. Let's seek the answers. Thank you all. Take care. God bless.
Thank you for having tuned in for ChristiTutionalist Politics Show. If you haven't already, please check out my primary internationally available book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you. Available anywhere books are sold. If you have locally run bookstores still near you, they can order it for you, or autographed copies are available online direct from me the terrorstrikes.info/shop. Be sure to check out more about today's discussion at thelibertybeacon.com, where my articles drop every Saturday. And let me remind, over time, the fancy high production items will come, but for now, for starters, it's just you as a very appreciated listener by me. All substance, no fluff, just straight to key discussion points. A show that looks at a variety of topics, mostly politics, through a Christian U.S. constitutionalist lens. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Take care. God bless. Like and subscribe to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast and share episodes. We need your help.
It is a myth that terrorism stopped during COVID. Unfortunately, mainstream media opted to prioritize pandemic hysteria over promoting all news. Terrorism continues. Simply hoping that it doesn't affect you is not a strategy. The new book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you, featured on The Author Show, is now available in paperback from bookstores, online, or as an ebook exclusively through Amazon Kindle. Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you by Joseph M. Leonard. Order today.